Greetings, everyone. So, I am aware that there is a bit of a debate about how faithful an adaptation of an original work should be to the source material. I'm aware of the fight, and I understand both sides. On one hand, you want to be respectful towards the source material because it's where the adaptation comes from. It's why the adaptation exists. But of course, at the same time, as other people point out, especially like when you adapt it from one medium to another, you necessarily have to change the adaptation. One of the most notable examples of this is when you adapt a novel into a movie. You're necessarily shortening the novel. Like, you can't compress everything in a novel, like say if it's like 500 pages long, you can't compress everything in a novel into like a 2.5 hour film. Like, some people have tried and more often than not failed because, there's necessarily going to be things you have to trim out from the novel when you are adapting it. But what a lot of people don't understand, in the second camp, the ones who say, you have to change it for the adaptation, is that yes, the medium definitely plays a role, but at the end of the day, there isn't the difference between mediums isn't as clear cut as we like to think it is. There's plenty of movies that read like really long books. There's novels that seem more like you're reading a screenplay, or you're reading a cinematic, or that like the story is very cinematic. So the real difference isn't as clear cut, and that's what just makes it that much more complicated about what really can you change. So I'm probably, if I had to pick a side, I'm more on the side of those who want to stay as loyal as you can to the source material. The source material isn't just sacred because it came first. It's because it lays the foundation of every work related to it that follows. It's you can't have an adaptation without the source material, and it's not just because it came first. It's because a lot of the angles, because there's different adaptations, there's different interpretations of the same story. But that's the thing, there needs to be a central story from which different interpretations can arise, and therefore and an adaptation at its core isn't just it isn't just a change from one medium to another. It's an interpretation. It's the creator's interpretation of the source material that plays a big role. So for example, you have a 19th century story that doesn't really focus on class relations that much. However, somebody in the modern day, somebody who wants to turn that 19th century novel into a film, even if the novelist themselves doesn't put that much emphasis on it, they notice in the source material that even though it doesn't take up, it's not the main focus, class relations do still play a vital role in the story, and therefore when they adapt the work, they really focus on tensions between members of different socioeconomic classes. And of course then it's like, but how much do you emphasize that? Because if you change the entire novel's purpose into just an outright commentary on class relations, it might still be a good adaptation, but it probably wouldn't be the best version of itself. A version that just highlights the tensions between classes without letting it take up more of the story than any other element is probably the best version of the message you're still trying to give. Like, for example, Francis Ford Coppola, when he adapted Puzo's The Godfather, what he did was he read the book first, and he wrote down his first impressions. He wrote notes in his copy of the book, and he actually wanted to make his source material with his notes inside his frame of reference instead of his screenplay. His screenplay was just a necessary step in the adaptation, but it wasn't the foundation of his adaptation. The foundation was the story that he wrote notes in. Because again, an adaptation really at the end of the day is interpretation. But so the thing is, you actually need to be loyal to the source material in order to adapt it properly, not just because it came first, but because your interpretation of the novel came from that novel. And the more respect you pay to the novel that was your inspiration for adapting the work, the more that you draw upon it, the more you validate your personal interpretation, because it becomes more about your interpretation than the source material. You might as well have just made just a new movie, maybe similar in like storyline and whatnot, but basically not an adaptation, just your own story. So that's my whole opinion on the issue about loyalty to the source material versus trying to be as loose with the adaptation. I'm more on the first camp. I'm with the people who want to be loyal. And the reason I am is because, actually, for the reasons that the second group, which says that the adaptation can be as loose an adaptation as it wants, for the reasons they don't want to give too much respect to the source material, because they want their own interpretation to be emphasized, to be out there. But the thing is, the more respect you pay the source material, the more respect you pay to the source material, the more that your interpretation actually stands out and it actually becomes stronger. So if you make the entire story about class tensions and nothing else, because that's how you read the book, that's actually going to be a terrible movie and a terrible way of delivering the message. Whereas if you emphasize it more than the novelist did, but you just keep it one of many plot elements, one of many story elements, your message actually would be stronger. So yeah, that's my whole opinion on adaptation, about the debate on adaptation. Please feel free to provide feedback or provide your own thoughts on the matter if you like.